The crimson aurora danced across Valdris Prime's frozen sky as the last human resistance fighter fell silent. Commander Kyle Vorthak watched through his neural interface as the orbital bombardment finally ceased, leaving nothing but crystallized atmosphere and the acrid smell of ozone. 3 billion souls, reduced to whispers in the ice. "Another world cleansed," announced Fleet Admiral Nyx Thera, her chitinous mandibles clicking with satisfaction. The hegemony's flagship Dominion's Edge cast shadows over the planet's Arctic surface, joined by 200 vessels of the Conquest fleet. The humans fought harder than expected, but their primitive technology proved inadequate. Vorthak nodded, his scaled hide rippling with approval. The Terran Colonial Authority had put up a fierce resistance for 18 months, but biological determination meant nothing against hegemony plasma cannons and quantum disruptors. This backwater system would serve as an excellent mining operation once the atmospheric processors finished their work. What none of them noticed was the thermal signature, buried 3 kilometers beneath the polar ice cap, a signature that had been dormant for exactly 73 hours, waiting for the electromagnetic interference from the bombardment to fade. Deep in the frozen darkness, emergency lighting bathed corridors in hellish red as Admiral Jorik Branwen opened his eyes. The stasis chamber's lid hissed open, releasing clouds of cryogenic vapor. Around him, 5,000 of humanity's finest stirred to consciousness. Pilots, marines, engineers, and technicians who had volunteered for the most desperate gambit in human history. The retribution had been humanity's secret masterpiece. Carrier so advanced that even the colonial authorities' top brass questioned its existence. Built in the shadow of a rogue comet, powered by experimental zero-point reactors, and armed with weapons that pushed the boundaries of known physics. When the invasion began, they'd had just enough time to submerge beneath Valdris Prime's ice. "Shelf and wait. Status report," Branwen croaked, his throat raw from the stasis chemicals. His bridge crew moved with practiced efficiency despite their disorientation. Lieutenant Commander Vex Meridian, his tactical officer, pulled up holographic displays with trembling fingers. "All systems operational, sir. The ice camouflage held perfectly. They registered us as a geological formation. Fleet composition above?" Her voice caught. 200 ships, Admiral. They brought everything." Branwen studied the tactical readout, his weathered face carved from granite. The hegemony fleet had spread across Valdris Prime's orbit like cancer, their ships designed for intimidation as much as warfare. Biomechanical monstrosities that looked more grown than built, powered by the tortured screams of conquered species. "What about the other colonies?" he asked quietly. "Gone, sir. New Geneva, Kepler Station, the mining worlds. All dark." The bridge fell silent except for the hum of life support systems. 5,000 souls against an empire that spanned half the galaxy. The mathematics were simple, brutal, and absolutely irrelevant. Branwen pulled up the carrier's personnel roster, studying faces that would never see home again. His fighter pilots were the best humanity had ever produced, equipped with craft that incorporated technology salvaged from a dozen alien wrecks. His Marines carried weapons that could punch through hegemony armor like paper. His engineers had spent 3 years turning theory into reality. "Signal all departments," he commanded, his voice carrying the weight of extinction. "Begin launch preparations. We're going hunting." Through the ice above, the hegemony celebrated their easy victory, completely unaware that humanity's deadliest weapon was stirring beneath their feet. The Retribution's hangar bays came alive with controlled chaos, as 5,000 crew members prepared for what military historians would later call the most audacious strike in human warfare. Admiral Branwen moved through the corridors like a specter of vengeance, his presence alone steadying nerves that had every right to be shattered. Wing Commander Zara Kestwick ran final diagnostics on her Phantom-class interceptor, its adaptive hull gleaming under the hangar lights. The craft incorporated technology that shouldn't exist: quantum phase shifters that could render a ship temporarily intangible, neural interface systems that merged pilot consciousness with machine intelligence, and weapons powered by contained singularities. "You realize this is insane?" muttered her wingman, Captain Rix Valorian, checking his own fighter's exotic matter reserves. Around them, 250 pilots prepared for launch, each one a volunteer who had passed psychological evaluations that would have broken lesser minds. Insane would be sitting here while they turn our people into fertilizer, Kestwick replied, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. Besides, when has humanity ever done things the easy way? 3 decks below, Colonel Thane Darkwater reviewed his Marine complement's battle plans. 1,500 shock troopers, each equipped with powered exoskeletons that could crush hegemony chitin, and weapons that fired compressed antimatter. Their mission was simple in concept, impossible in execution: board enemy vessels and capture their command structure alive. Remember, we need prisoners, Darkwater addressed his sergeants. The hegemony's fleet operates on biological command codes. Kill the wrong bug, and we lose access to their entire network. Meanwhile, in the engineering section's chief engineer, Lixa Novastorm supervised the final calibrations on systems that pushed theoretical physics into uncharted territory. The Retribution's engines could fold space-time around the ship, creating temporary wormholes that bypassed conventional faster-than-light travel. Her quantum computers processed battle scenarios at rates that approached prescience. Admiral, she reported through the comm system. The displacement drives are ready, but I can only guarantee 12 jumps before the exotic matter reserves are exhausted. Then we'd better make them count, Branwen replied from the bridge, watching his tactical displays update with hegemony fleet positions. The aliens had settled into standard occupation patterns, a fatal mistake that demonstrated their contempt for human ingenuity. The carrier's intelligence officer, Commander Nexus Voidhawk, had spent the past hour infiltrating hegemony communication networks using techniques that bordered on digital sorcery. His cybernetic implants, illegal by colonial authority standards, allowed him to interface directly with alien computer systems. Sir, I've identified their command structure, Voidhawk reported, his artificial eyes glowing with data streams. Fleet Admiral Nixthara commands from the Dominion's edge, but the real prize is their hive mind coordinator aboard the Eternal Subjugation. That ship controls their entire battle network. Branwen studied the targeting data, calculating odds that any sane commander would reject. The hegemony ships were individually superior to anything humanity had built, crewed by warriors who had conquered 100 species. But they had one critical weakness. They had never faced an enemy desperate enough to embrace technologies that violated several laws of physics. All hands, this is the Admiral speaking, Branwen announced shipwide. 3 hours ago, the hegemony believed they had exterminated humanity's presence in this system. They celebrated too early. Today, we teach them why underestimating human stubbornness is a fatal mistake. The crew's response echoed through the carrier's halls, not cheers or battle cries, but the quiet determination of professionals preparing to write history in blood and fire. They had lost everything that mattered, which made them the most dangerous force in the galaxy. Begin phase displacement, Branwen ordered. Let's introduce ourselves properly. The Retribution began its ascent through 3 kilometers of ice, reality bending around its hull, as space-time folded to its will. Reality tore open like wounded flesh as the Retribution materialized in the shadow of Valdris Prime's largest moon. The hegemony's sensor networks, calibrated for conventional physics, registered only cosmic background radiation, where humanity's deadliest warship now lurked. Admiral Branwen stood on his bridge like a prophet of destruction, watching as his impossible vessel prepared to rewrite the rules of interstellar warfare. The carrier's hull, a marriage of human engineering and salvaged alien technology, rippled with quantum uncertainties that made it appear ghostly on visual sensors. Launch fighters, he commanded. Wing Commander Kestwick led the first wave, her Phantom Interceptor phase shifting through normal space-time, as 250 fighters erupted from the Retribution's bays. The hegemony fleet, spread across a defensive perimeter that should have been impregnable, never saw them coming. The first alien ship to die was the cruiser Flesh Render, its biomechanical hull splitting open as Kestwick's singularity torpedoes punched through dimensions the hegemony didn't know existed. The vessel's death scream, a psychic wail that spoke of agony and disbelief, echoed across subspace frequencies. "Target the command vessels," Kestwick transmitted to her squadrons. "Remember, we're not here to win fair fights." Captain Valorian's fighter materialized inside the hegemony destroyer Blood Harvest, his quantum phase shifters, allowing him to bypass shields and armor entirely. His antimatter charges detonated in the ship's reactor core, turning the vessel into a brief star that illuminated the darkness between worlds. Aboard the hegemony flagship, Fleet Admiral Nix Thara felt her certainty crumble as impossible reports flooded her command center. Ships were dying without apparent cause, human fighters appeared and vanished like phantoms, and her sensor officers reported readings that violated everything she understood about physics. "Impossible," she chittered, her mandibles clicking with agitation. "The humans are extinct. We confirmed their destruction, but impossibility was humanity's specialty." While Kestwick's fighters carved through the hegemony's outer perimeter, the retribution phase jumped directly into the enemy formation's heart. The carrier's main batteries, weapons that channeled controlled black holes, opened fire on targets that couldn't comprehend what was killing them. The Dominion's edge shuddered as exotic energy beams punched through its quantum-reinforced hull. Nixithara's crew scrambled to respond, but their weapons couldn't lock onto a target that existed in 17 different probability states simultaneously. Colonel Darkwater's Marines launched in assault pods that phased through enemy shields, like they were soap bubbles. His first target was the hegemony dreadnought Eternal Subjugation, the ship that controlled the fleet's hive mind battle network. "Remember, we need their coordinator alive," Darkwater reminded his troops as their pods materialized inside the alien ship's corridors. "Everything else dies." The Marines moved like demons through the ship's organic passages, their powered exoskeletons crushing hegemony warriors who had conquered species across the galaxy. These were soldiers who had nothing left to lose, fighting with weapons that turned matter into energy and energy into death. Commander Voidhawk, meanwhile, was conducting his own form of warfare from the Retribution's command center. His consciousness merged with quantum computers that processed reality at the subatomic level, infiltrated the hegemony's communication networks like a digital plague. "Admiral, I'm reading massive confusion in their ranks," he reported, his artificial eyes blazing with stolen data. "They're trying to coordinate a response, but their command structure assumes conventional physics. They literally can't understand what's happening to them." The truth was simple and terrifying. Humanity had pushed beyond the boundaries of known science not through careful research, but through the desperate innovation that came from facing extinction. The Retribution and her crew represented what happened when a species chose to embrace technologies that other races considered too dangerous to develop. As the first phase of the battle concluded, 30 hegemony ships had been destroyed or crippled, their crews reduced to organic debris. Drifting in the void, the alien fleet's perfect formation had become a scattered mess of vessels trying to fight an enemy that refused to obey the laws of physics. "Phase 1 complete," Branwen announced to his crew. "Now we show them what humans do when they're properly motivated." The Eternal Subjugation had become a charnel house of chitin and ichor as Colonel Darkwater's Marines carved through its corridors like a surgical blade. The hegemony warriors, creatures bred for conquest across 1,000 worlds, fell before weapons that violated their understanding of physical law. Darkwater himself led the assault on the ship's neural core, where the hive mind coordinator waited. The creature was a grotesque fusion of biology and technology, its massive brain sac pulsing with bioluminescent patterns that controlled the fleet's battle networks. "Target acquired," Darkwater reported, his exoskeleton sensors analyzing the alien's neural interfaces. "Beginning extraction protocols." The coordinator shrieked in languages that predated civilization, its psychic screams battering against the Marines' mental defenses. But humanity had learned to weaponize even their own suffering. Each soldier's mind was protected by neural dampeners, calibrated to their species' particular brand of stubborn defiance. Meanwhile, Wing Commander Kestwick was discovering that the hegemony's remaining ships were adapting faster than expected. Her Phantom fighters still held every technological advantage, but the aliens were learning to track them using gravitational distortions rather than conventional sensors. "They're getting smart," she transmitted to Admiral Branwen as her squadron engaged a cluster of hegemony cruisers near the planet's orbital processing stations. "Their adaptation protocols are more sophisticated than our intelligence suggested." Captain Valorian found this out the hard way when his fighter materialized inside what should have been an empty cargo bay, only to discover a waiting ambush of hegemony warriors equipped with quantum net weapons. His craft's phase shifters screamed warnings as reality-distorting fields tried to trap him between dimensions. "Valorian's in trouble," Kestwick reported, watching her wingman's fighter flicker between states of existence. The quantum nets were designed to catch ships attempting dimensional jumps, proof that the hegemony possessed technologies they had kept hidden during their initial conquest. The battle was becoming a deadly education for both sides. Humanity's impossible weapons met alien technologies that had conquered half the galaxy, creating chaos that rewrote the fundamental assumptions of interstellar warfare. Aboard the Retribution, Commander Voidhawk made a discovery that changed everything. His infiltration of the hegemony's data networks had uncovered files that made his artificial blood run cold. "Admiral," he reported, his voice tight with controlled fury, "the hegemony didn't just conquer our colonies. They're processing our people, the survivors. They're being used as raw material for their bioships." The revelation hit the bridge, grew like a physical blow. The ships they were fighting weren't just alien vessels. They were partially constructed from the remains of humanity's children, parents, and lovers. Every hull plate might contain fragments of human consciousness, trapped in biomechanical horror. Branwen's face became a mask of absolute zero. "Change of mission parameters," he announced shipwide. "We're not just fighting for revenge anymore. We're conducting a rescue operation." The Admiral's new orders transformed the battle from a desperate strike into something far more personal. The Marines began targeting bioprocessing facilities rather than just military installations. The fighters shifted their attack patterns to disable, rather than destroy ships that might contain human prisoners. The Retribution itself began deploying previously theoretical technologies, consciousness extraction beams that could potentially separate human minds from alien biomatrices. Chief Engineer Novastorm worked miracles with physics that existed more in theory than reality, converting the carrier's secondary weapons into devices that could perform psychological archaeology on living tissue. Her quantum computers processed the moral mathematics of extracting souls from biomechanical hell. "I'm reading 17,000 human consciousness patterns distributed across their fleet," she reported, her voice hollow with the implications. "They're integrated into everything: navigation systems, weapon controls, life support. The hegemony turned our people into slaves at the molecular level. The discovery transformed rage into something colder and more terrible." Humanity's response shifted from military strike to existential warfare, the kind of conflict where victory meant redefining the possible and defeat meant spiritual extinction. As the battle entered its fourth hour, both sides had learned bitter lessons about the nature of technological evolution and moral compromise, but only one side was fighting for the right to exist as something other than raw material. The bioprocessing facility aboard the hegemony world ship Harvest of Sorrows contained horrors that would have broken the sanity of any species that hadn't already lost everything that mattered. Colonel Darkwater's Marines moved through corridors lined with neural tanks, each one containing the dissolved remains of human consciousness merged with alien biotechnology. "Sir, I'm reading active neural patterns in these tanks," reported Sergeant Major Crix Ironwolf, her voice distorted by the breathing apparatus necessary to survive the facility's toxic atmosphere. "They're still aware. After 18 months, they're still aware." Darkwater felt something cold and primitive rise in his chest, an emotion that predated civilization and transcended military training. The hegemony hadn't just killed humanity's colonies. They had transformed their victims into components of their war machine, trapped in eternal servitude while conscious of their fate. His exoskeleton's medical scanners confirmed the worst fears. Human neural tissue had been woven into the ship's control systems, creating a hybrid intelligence that suffered continuously while serving its captors. Every weapon fired, every course correction, every tactical decision was filtered through the tortured consciousness of humanity's children. Aboard the Retribution, Admiral Branwen received reports that transformed military strategy into moral imperative. The consciousness extraction beams were working, but slowly. Each rescued mind required careful separation from alien biomatrices that had grown around human neural tissue like malignant tumors. "We can save them," Chief Engineer Novastorm reported. Her hands steady despite the magnitude of what she was attempting. But the process requires direct interface with each ship's neural core. We need boarding parties on every major vessel. Wing Commander Kestwick's squadrons had evolved their tactics from surgical strikes to something resembling psychic surgery. Her fighters carried specialized payloads, quantum resonance devices that could disrupt the bio-neural networks without destroying the human consciousness trapped within. "Confirmed neural separation on the cruiser Bone Garden," she reported after her latest attack run. "I'm reading 1,047 human consciousness patterns successfully extracted and uploaded to our quantum storage matrices." But the hegemony was adapting with terrifying efficiency. Fleet Admiral Nick Cythera had finally understood what she was fighting. Not just another species military, but survivors driven by a form of determination that her race's evolutionary psychology couldn't comprehend. "Deploy the Omega Protocol," she commanded from her damaged flagship. "If we cannot defeat them conventionally, we will drag them into biological assimilation. Release the spore clouds." The space around Valdris Prime suddenly filled with microscopic organisms designed to convert any biological matter into hegemony. Biotechnology. The spores were a weapon of last resort, capable of transforming entire ecosystems into raw material for the hegemony's expansion. Commander Voidhawk detected the biological attack vectors moments before they reached the Retribution. "Admiral, massive bioweapon deployment. They're trying to convert us at the cellular level." But humanity's desperate innovation had prepared for even this possibility. The carrier's hull began secreting nanotech antibodies, microscopic machines programmed with one simple directive: preserve human biological integrity at any cost. The ship became a fortress of molecular warfare, its surface crawling with invisible defenders. "All human personnel, initiate biological quarantine protocols," Branwen ordered. "We're about to find out if our people are as stubborn at the cellular level as they are everywhere else." The spore attack created a new battlefield that existed at the intersection of biology and technology. Human nanobots fought hegemony bioweapons in microscopic warfare that determined whether Earth's children would remain recognizably human or be transformed into alien components. As the battle raged across multiple levels of reality, conventional, space warfare, quantum dimensional combat, consciousness extraction operations, and now biological warfare at the molecular level, both sides discovered that they were fighting for more than territory or resources. They were fighting to determine the fundamental nature of identity itself. The Retribution's medical bays filled with rescued human consciousness patterns, each one a small miracle extracted from biomechanical hell. But even as they saved their people, Branwen's crew realized they were engaged in a form of conflict that would transform the survivors into something new. Warriors who had transcended the normal limitations of biological existence. The question was no longer whether humanity would survive, but what they would become in the process of ensuring their survival. The space around Valdris Prime had become a laboratory of impossible physics as humanity's most desperate gambit reached its crescendo. The Retribution existed in 17 different probability states simultaneously, its quantum-enhanced hull rippling with energies that made reality itself uncertain. Admiral Branwen watched from his bridge as the consciousness extraction operations entered their final phase. 43,000 human minds had been successfully separated from hegemony biomatrices, their neural patterns stored in quantum crystalline structures that preserved not just memory, but the essential spark of individual identity. "We're approaching theoretical limits," Chief Engineer Novastorm reported, her hands dancing across control interfaces that processed physics in real time. "The quantum storage matrices are at 97% capacity, and we're detecting cascade resonance in the probability generators." Wing Commander Kestwick's fighters had evolved beyond conventional spacecraft into something resembling digital ghosts, craft that existed primarily as information patterns, materializing only long enough to deliver their exotic payloads before dissolving back into quantum uncertainty. "Final sweep of the bioprocessing ships," she transmitted. Her consciousness merged so completely with her fighter systems that the distinction between pilot and machine had become academic. Reading 2,047 remaining human neural patterns aboard the Cathedral of Screams. But the hegemony's adaptation had reached a critical threshold. Fleet Admiral Nyx Thera, her flagship burning around her, made a decision that would haunt the galaxy for millennia to come. "Activate the convergence protocol," she commanded, her words carrying the weight of species-level desperation. "If we cannot conquer them, we will merge with them. Initiate total bioassimilation of all human neural patterns." The remaining hegemony ships began to transform, their biomechanical hulls opening like flowers of chitin and metal. From each vessel emerged streams of consciousness, not just human minds trapped in alien matrices, but hybrid intelligences that combined human ingenuity with hegemony collective processing. Colonel Darkwater, leading the final assault on the eternal subjugation, found himself facing enemies that spoke with human voices while wearing alien forms. The rescued consciousness patterns were being weaponized, turned into biological ammunition, in a war that had transcended conventional definitions of victory and defeat. "They're using our people as psychological warfare," he reported, his Marines hesitating as former humans begged for death while trying to kill their rescuers. "The bioassimilation process preserves human emotional responses while converting loyalty patterns to hegemony objectives." Commander Voidhawk, his cybernetic consciousness interfacing directly with the battle network, made a discovery that changed everything. The hegemony's convergence protocol wasn't just a weapon. It was their species' ultimate survival strategy, designed to absorb the strengths of conquered races while eliminating their independence. "Admiral," he reported, his artificial eyes blazing with terrible understanding, "the hegemony has done this before. Their entire civilization is built on absorbed species. They're not just trying to defeat us, they're trying to add our biological and technological distinctiveness to their own." Branwen felt the weight of cosmic irony settle on his shoulders. Humanity had pushed beyond the boundaries of known physics to rescue their people, only to discover that the enemy's final strategy was to make rescue meaningless by converting the rescued into willing servants. But humanity's gift for embracing impossible solutions hadn't been exhausted. The Retribution's quantum computers, processing battle scenarios at rates that approached prophetic accuracy, identified a possibility that existed at the intersection of sacrifice and transcendence. "All hands," Branwen announced shipwide. "Prepare for Omega configuration. We're going to show the hegemony what happens when they try to digest something that refuses to be consumed." The carrier began to transform, its hull reconfiguring around the 43,000 rescued consciousness patterns. The ship was becoming something unprecedented, a hybrid entity that combined human determination with technologies that existed beyond conventional physics. Chief Engineer Novastorm worked with quantum matrices that processed information at the speed of thought, creating a technological resurrection that would either save humanity's essence or destroy it completely. The consciousness patterns weren't just being stored, they were being integrated into the ship's operational matrix, creating a collective intelligence that remained recognizably human while transcending biological limitations. As the final battle approached, both humanity and the hegemony realized they were fighting for the right to define the future of consciousness itself in a galaxy where the line between biology and technology had become meaningless. The transformation of the Retribution into something beyond conventional starship classification created ripples in space-time that registered on sensors across 3 star systems. The carrier had become a technological apotheosis. 43,000 human consciousness patterns merged with quantum computing systems that processed reality itself as data. Admiral Branwen felt his individual identity begin to dissolve and expand simultaneously as the ship's neural networks integrated. His command experience with the collective wisdom of humanity's survivors. He was still himself, but he was also everyone. Every rescued mind, every fallen hero, every child who had been processed into hegemony biomatrices. "We are more than the sum of our parts," he spoke with voices that numbered in the thousands, each word carrying harmonic frequencies that made the universe itself listen. "We are what happens when a species chooses transcendence over extinction." The hegemony fleet, gathered around Valdris Prime in formations that had conquered 100 worlds, suddenly faced an enemy that existed outside their understanding of possible. The Retribution was no longer just a ship, it was humanity's collective, unconscious given form, powered by technologies that married quantum mechanics with the indomitable will to survive. Fleet Admiral Nixthara felt her biomechanical implants screaming warnings as her sensors tried to process what the human vessel I had become. The readings were impossible. The ship existed in multiple dimensions simultaneously, its hull phases shifting between matter and pure information. "What have they done?" she chittered, her mandibles clicking with the first fear her species had experienced in millennia. "They violated the fundamental laws of biological existence." Wing Commander Kestwick, her consciousness now distributed across 17 different fighter craft simultaneously, led an assault that redefined the meaning of squadron tactics. Her pilots moved as extensions of a single will, their weapons delivering payloads of pure possibility that unraveled hegemony ships at the quantum level. "We remember every face," she transmitted across all frequencies, her voice carrying the weight of species-level grief transformed into purpose. "Every name, every dream that was stolen. We are their vengeance given form." The consciousness extraction had evolved beyond rescue operation into something approaching digital resurrection. The hegemony's bioprocessing facilities were being systematically converted into liberation matrices, technologies that separated human awareness from alien biotechnology while preserving the lessons learned from transcendence. Colonel Darkwater's Marines had become something beyond conventional soldiers. Moving through enemy ships with perfect coordination, they represented humanity's capacity for violence elevated to an art form that respected the necessity of mercy. Each boarding action was simultaneously surgical strike and sacrament, converting hegemony vessels into sanctuaries for freed consciousness. Commander Voidhawk, his cybernetic nature allowing him to interface directly with the ship's expanded neural networks, made the final discovery that would reshape galactic civilization. The hegemony's absorption of conquered species hadn't just been expansion, it had been running from something even more terrible than themselves. "Admiral, all consciousness patterns. We're receiving data from the deepest hegemony archives," he reported with voices that harmonized across dimensional barriers. "They're not just conquerors, they're refugees. Something drove them from their original home, something that consumed entire galaxies. The revelation transformed the conflict from war to something approaching cosmic necessity. The hegemony's brutal expansion across the galaxy had been motivated not by conquest, but by escape, running from entities that made their bioassimilation techniques look merciful by comparison. But humanity's response to this cosmic horror was characteristically impossible. Rather than fleeing, they chose to become something capable of standing against forces that had driven entire species to desperate measures. The final confrontation began as the retribution phase shifted into direct contact with the hegemony flagship, but instead of weapons fire, something unprecedented occurred. The human vessel began broadcasting pure possibility, quantum frequencies that offered the hegemony's trapped consciousness patterns a choice they had never been given. You don't have to run anymore. Branwen's collective voice resonated across subspace. We know what you're afraid of. Help us become strong enough to face it together. The response came not as surrender but as recognition. Two species that had pushed beyond conventional existence, discovering they were natural allies against forces that threatened all consciousness in the galaxy. As the combined human hegemony, Fleet began its transformation into something unprecedented. Observers across the galaxy would mark this moment as the beginning of the Transcendence Wars, conflicts that would determine whether consciousness itself would survive in a universe that had become actively hostile to independent thought. Humanity had saved more than their people. They had discovered their cosmic purpose as guardians of the impossible, protectors of the spark that refused to be extinguished, regardless of the forces arrayed against it. The carrier that had been hidden beneath Valdris Prime's ice had become the flagship of a new kind of civilization, one that chose transcendence over safety, growth over comfort, and the preservation of individual consciousness over the collective peace of extinction. They had taken the planet, but they had missed the carrier below the ice, and that oversight had changed the course of galactic history forever.